Why are you inside a closed business?
I own it. I'm closing out the register and locking up inventory.
Show me proof. Now.
My license and permits are on the wall behind me.
That doesn't mean anything.
It's my business. It literally means everything.
Turn around.
Please, just verify it. Run the address.
Call dispatch.
Officer Derek Holt stepped into the electronics shop after hours with the posture of a man who'd already decided what he was looking at. His hand hovered near his weapon. His eyes went straight to the open cash drawer, then the back hallway, then Evan Carter behind the counter. Holt treated the scene like a crime in progress. Evan treated it like a misunderstanding that should end quickly if basic facts got checked. Holt demanded to know why someone was inside a closed business. Evan explained he owned the place and he was finishing close-out tasks, counting the drawer, logging receipts, and locking up inventory for the night. Evan kept his hands visible and didn't move fast, because he knew exactly how quickly small things get misread in moments like this. Holt didn't slow down. He pressed harder, as if each answer was just another excuse. Evan showed his ID. Holt barely looked at it. Evan pointed to the wall behind the counter, where the business license and permits were displayed with Evan's name on them. Holt didn't step in to read them. He acted like verification was optional. That's the first sign this was going to go bad. When the easiest proof sits right in front of someone and they refuse to even look, the goal usually isn't the truth, it's control. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you watch stories where cameras and paperwork expose abuse of power, hit like and subscribe, because this one ends with a settlement and a badge getting taken away. Now here's how it started. Evan ran a small electronics repair shop in a strip mall. Nothing fancy. He fixed phones, laptops, tablets, game consoles, and whatever else people couldn't afford to replace. The shop stayed afloat because Evan did two things consistently: good work and tight routines. Closing time didn't mean he walked out the second the doors locked. He stayed to finish the stuff that keeps a small business alive. He counted cash, logged receipts, sealed deposits, checked work orders, and secured customer devices. That inventory mattered. One mistake could turn into angry customers, chargebacks, or insurance headaches. On this night, the closed sign was up. The front door was locked. Evan was still inside under the bright lights, focused on the end-of-day process. Everything was normal on his side of that counter. Outside, Holt drove by and saw the lights. Holt didn't call it in as a quick welfare check. He didn't approach like someone trying to confirm whether the owner was inside finishing up. He treated light in a storefront like a burglary signal and moved like he wanted the first move. Once Holt was inside, he questioned Evan like Evan had been caught mid-act. Evan kept trying to bring it back to verifiable facts. Ownership, ID, license wall, permits, the address, the business name, everything that could be checked in under a minute. Holt kept rejecting every off-ramp. Evan suggested Holt run the information and confirm it with dispatch. Holt did run Evan. The check came back clean. No warrants. No flags. Nothing that supported the idea Evan was breaking into anything. A normal officer ends it there, apologizes, and leaves. Holt didn't. He switched lanes without admitting it. Suddenly, it wasn't just burglary. Now he treated it like trespassing. Now he acted like Evan being inside after hours needed permission, even though Evan had just explained he owned the place. Evan pointed again to the documents on the wall. He mentioned there was mail addressed to him at that business. He offered to show keys and lease paperwork. Holt didn't respond like a person weighing evidence. He responded like a person protecting a decision. Then Holt took out handcuffs. Evan didn't resist because Evan understood the math. Arguing on the spot can turn a bad decision into a dangerous one. He stayed controlled, kept his body language steady, and let Holt do what Holt clearly came to do. Holt walked him towards the front door and out into public view, right in front of the storefront, like Evan had been caught stealing from his own livelihood. Meanwhile, multiple security cameras kept recording everything from angles Holt wasn't thinking about. Holt didn't just arrest Evan, he made it visible. He guided Evan along the storefront windows and out into the strip mall's open space, where anyone passing could see cuffs on the shop owner. Cars rolled by on the main road. A couple people slowed down. One person walking toward the nail salon hesitated and stared. Holt didn't try to keep it quiet. He looked like he wanted the scene to confirm his assumption. Evan stayed controlled. He didn't pull away. He didn't argue in a way that could be twisted into resisting. He kept repeating the same simple facts, and Holt kept treating those facts like a story Evan made up 5 seconds ago. Holt positioned Evan near the curb like it was safer for him and more humiliating for Evan. Then he started asking questions again, questions Evan had already answered inside, only now the goal was different. Holt wanted Evan to contradict himself. He wanted a slip. He wanted anything he could write later to justify what he'd already done. Evan didn't give him that. Evan directed Holt back to the most basic proof: the license wall inside the shop with Evan's name, the permits, the shop mail, the keys, the alarm code, the business records. All things a reasonable officer could verify without drama. Holt didn't verify, he stalled. He talked like the decision was already made and the paperwork would catch up. Then the second unit rolled in. Officer Maya Ramirez stepped out and read the scene the way experienced cops do, quickly, quietly, and with her eyes open. She didn't start with the story Holt was telling. She started with the obvious question: what's the cleanest way to confirm who belongs here? Ramirez walked into the shop while Holt stayed outside with Evan. That choice mattered. It removed the ego contest from the verification step. It also put Ramirez in front of the evidence Holt had refused to even look at. Inside, the proof wasn't subtle. The business license and permits were posted where customers could see them, with Evan's name on them. Mail sat behind the counter, addressed to Evan at that business address. There were printed photos near the register from the shop's opening day, the kind owners put up when they're proud of what they built. Evan's face was in those photos, in that exact shop, behind that exact counter. Ramirez didn't need a long investigation. She needed eyes. She came back outside and told Holt what she saw. She didn't posture. She didn't argue like it was personal. She gave him the simple reality. The owner's documentation was on the wall, and the shop had plenty of indicators that Evan belonged there. Holt didn't accept the correction. He reacted the way people react when they've put their pride into the wrong decision. He tried to hold the line. He treated Ramirez's observations like they were irrelevant. He kept pushing the suspected burglary angle, even though nothing in the shop looked disturbed and even though Evan's information had already come back clean. Ramirez didn't match Holt's tone. She stayed professional, but she also didn't join the fantasy. That created the first visible split. One officer stuck an assumption. One officer using verification like she was trained to do. Holt made a move to end the debate the way he wanted, by removing Evan from the scene. He put Evan in the patrol car anyway. Evan watched the shop through the window as Holt shut the door. That was the real gut punch. The place Evan built with long nights and careful routines was now being treated like a crime scene, and he couldn't even stand inside it to protect it. While Holt started the process to transport, Ramirez stayed back for a moment. She looked up at the security cameras. There were several. Not hidden, not subtle. They pointed directly at the counter, the entry, the back hallway, and the front windows. Ramirez already knew what that meant. Whatever Holt said later would have to match what the cameras recorded. Holt drove Evan to the station. Evan sat cuffed in the back, while Holt built his narrative out loud through radio updates and short explanations to anyone who'd listen. He framed Evan as a suspicious person caught inside after hours. He avoided the parts that didn't help him, like the posted license, the mail, the photos, and the clean check. At the station, the confidence dropped. Not because Holt suddenly grew a conscience, because other people were present. and Holt couldn't control what they saw. A desk sergeant at the front recognized Evan before Holt even finished the intake explanation. Evan wasn't a stranger downtown. He'd fixed phones for half the block. He'd done quick repairs for city staff. He'd built a reputation by being consistent, not flashy. The sergeant asked what this was about, and Holt tried to keep it simple. After-hours business, suspected burglary, trespassing. The sergeant didn't buy it on faith. He asked for the basics: identification, address, proof, reasonable cause. Ramirez arrived not long after, and she didn't come empty-handed. She came with what Holt should have checked at the start: the posted license, the mail, and the fact that the shop's cameras captured everything. That shifted the room. Because now the issue wasn't whether Evan could prove ownership. It was why Holt refused to verify it. Leadership pulled the footage. They didn't need a full compilation. They needed minutes. The video showed Holt entering hot, refusing to read the license, dismissing Evan's ID, and escalating even after the system check came back clean. It also showed Evan staying calm and compliant the whole time. That's when orders came down to remove the cuffs. Evan got uncuffed inside the station, not out of kindness, but because keeping him restrained after seeing that footage would have been reckless. The desk sergeant made it clear this wasn't going to be handled as a normal arrest that just got sorted out later. Holt stood there while the situation flipped on him in real time. Evan didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. The cameras already did the talking. By the next morning, Evan wasn't just dealing with embarrassment. He was dealing with risk. His shop had been left in a weird limbo the night before, and now he had to clean up the mess Holt created. Customers with devices inside, late-night security logs, and the question every small business owner hates: what else did that officer touch, move, or claim happened? Evan handled it the same way he handled repairs. Evidence first, timeline second. Emote CI later. He pulled the security footage as soon as he got back to the shop. Not one angle. All of them. Front door camera. Counter camera. Back hallway camera. The exterior camera that captured Holt walking him out in cuffs like Evan was a suspect pulled from a crime scene. The footage didn't make Evan look good. It made Holt look reckless. It showed Holt entering with suspicion already locked in, refusing to read the posted license, dismissing the ID, and escalating after the system check came back clean. It also showed Evan doing the exact thing departments always claim they want: calm, compliant, hands visible, offering verification. That video gave Evan something most people don't get: a clean record of the whole decision chain. Evan called an attorney that afternoon. Not a friend of a friend, not somebody who handles everything. A civil rights lawyer who knew what mattered: unlawful seizure, false arrest, and the way I thought falls apart when you ignore obvious proof. While the legal side started moving, the public side started moving too, because someone outside the shop had filmed a short clip during the cuff walk. It wasn't the full story. It didn't need to be. It showed Evan in cuffs in front of his own storefront, and it showed Holt acting like he'd just solved a crime. That clip hit social media first. Then people asked for context. Then Evan's attorney advised him on how to release the footage safely without messing up the case. Once the full security video went out, the argument ended. People didn't have to guess what happened. They watched it. They watched Holt ignore the license wall. They watched him keep pushing even after verification came back clean. They watched him force the situation into an arrest anyway. And the comments all landed on the same point. This wasn't confusion. This was refusal. Local news picked it up fast. Then bigger accounts reposted it. Then national outlets started sniffing around, because a cop arresting a business owner inside his own shop is the kind of story that travels. Inside the department, leadership didn't treat it like a PR inconvenience. They treated it like a liability grenade. Internal Affairs opened the review, and not just for tone or attitude. The question was direct. Why did Holt arrest a man for trespassing in a business that clearly belonged to him? after checking his information and seeing proof in plain sight. That's when Holt's history stopped being background noise and became relevant. Complaints that had been brushed off as misunderstandings suddenly looked like a pattern when the department had video showing the same behavior: escalation, dismissing explanations, refusing basic verification, then writing it up like the civilian forced his hand. Internal Affairs didn't need to guess what Holt would say. They already knew the defense script: officer safety, suspicion, training, split-second decisions. The problem was Holt didn't make a split-second decision. He made a series of decisions, and each one had an easy off-ramp he ignored. By the end of that week, Holt was on administrative leave. The department didn't announce it with a big speech. They kept it tight. The video was doing enough talking. Evan's lawsuit hit next, filed in federal court with a clean narrative. Evan was seized and arrested without probable cause, despite clear proof of ownership, and the officer refused to verify facts that were immediately available. That legal move forced the city into a corner. Because once a federal civil rights case is filed, the city's lawyers don't argue feelings. They argue facts, policies, and exposure. And the facts were brutal. The city requested records. Internal Affairs requested more records. Suddenly, Holt wasn't just the guy in one viral video. He was a name attached to multiple prior incidents. And now every one of those incidents looked like it needed a second look. Evan also started getting support from the community in a way that wasn't performative. Customers showed up the next day just to spend money there. People left reviews describing Evan as professional and steady. Local business owners offered help. A neighboring shop printed a sign telling people to support Evan's store. That part mattered, not because it fixed the arrest, because it took away the damage Holt tried to cause with public humiliation. Holt tried to defend himself through internal channels, but the video didn't allow the usual wiggle room. He couldn't claim Evan was aggressive. The footage showed Evan controlled. He couldn't claim there was no proof. The license wall and shop materials were visible. He couldn't claim he verified, and it didn't match. Dispatch came back clean. So the defense narrowed to one thing: Holt insisting he still believed something was wrong. That belief wasn't a legal standard. By the time the city sat down to discuss settlement, the conversation wasn't, "Did this happen?" It was, "How much will it cost if we lose in open court?" And this case was the kind cities don't want juries to see. The city didn't drag this out, because dragging it out would have been worse. Once Evan's attorney filed the federal civil rights case, the city's legal department had to evaluate the same thing every risk manager looks at: what a jury would do with clear video, clear proof of ownership, and a clean dispatch check that got ignored. The answer wasn't complicated. They started talking settlement early, not because they suddenly cared about Evan's dignity, because the case was indefensible on camera, and every extra month would add attorney fees, bad press, and more documents coming out in discovery. Evan's team focused on concrete damage, lost time, lost business, emotional distress, the public humiliation, the fact that he got arrested inside his own workplace after offering multiple ways to verify ownership. The footage made the timeline simple, and it made the decision points unavoidable. Then Internal Affairs finished digging. Holt's record mattered now in a way it never had before. Complaints that used to get treated like, "He's just aggressive," started lining up into something more consistent: refusing basic verification, escalating when corrected, and writing reports that didn't match what others observed. Leadership couldn't shrug it off this time, because the public already saw the clearest example. The department suspended Holt while the investigation ran. It wasn't a friendly suspension. It was containment. Keep him off the street. Stop the damage from multiplying. The next step was termination, and it didn't land like a shock inside the building. A lot of officers had already watched the footage. They knew what it showed. They also knew what it meant for their jobs when one person's ego turns into a lawsuit the city can't win. Holt lost his law enforcement career the same way he ran that call, by refusing to verify, refusing to adjust, and refusing to accept being wrong. Now the money. The city settled for $400,000 because there was no smart alternative. Going to trial would have put Holt's full history under a microscope, and it would have forced city attorneys to defend the idea that an officer can ignore obvious proof and still claim it was reasonable. That argument doesn't survive a jury that can see the whole thing in high definition. Evan didn't walk away calling it a victory. He called it accountability with a price tag. He used part of the settlement in a way that made sense for him. He expanded the shop instead of hiding from what happened. He upgraded security. He added better exterior lighting. He hired help so closing alone late at night wasn't his normal routine anymore. He also set up clearer after-hours signage, not because he owed anyone an explanation, but because he was done letting assumptions run his life. The community response stayed strong. People didn't just post, they showed up. They brought business. They recommended him to friends. They left reviews that made it clear the shop wasn't going anywhere. Other local owners reached out, partly to support Evan, and partly because they recognized the bigger issue. If this could happen to him, with licenses on the wall and cameras running, it could happen to anyone with the wrong officer on the wrong night. The department tried to control the narrative at first. Standard language, standard statements, nothing specific. That didn't work. So leadership did the only thing that could reduce the damage long term. They turned the footage into training material. Not as entertainment, as a warning, a step-by-step breakdown of what not to do. That video didn't just cost one officer his job. It changed how supervisors talked about stops and detentions and roll call. It gave younger officers a real example of how fast a bad decision becomes a federal case. It also gave civilians something rare. A moment where the system couldn't pretend it didn't see the problem. Evan kept his head down and kept building. He didn't become a public figure. He became what he already was, just louder in one way. He stopped accepting "sort it out later" as a normal response to rights violations. That's the lesson here. This whole thing started because one officer saw lights on and decided the story before checking the facts. Evan didn't win by getting lucky. He won by staying calm, keeping everything on record, and having cameras that didn't blink when a badge stopped listening. So let me ask you, if you were Evan, would you have stayed as calm as he did? Or would you have snapped the moment the officer ignored your license on the wall? Drop your take in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with someone in power who refused to verify the simplest facts, share this with someone who needs to see how accountability actually happens. And if you want more real, grounded stories, where rights receipts and recordings expose abuse of power, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Both of you IDs, right now.
Officer, what's the legal reason for the demand?
I got a suspicious persons call, and you look suspicious.
We're eating breakfast. Who said we were doing anything wrong?
You don't need details. I said show ID.
No, we're asking you to explain.
Keep talking like that, and I can arrest both of you for obstruction.
Officer Tyler Bennett walked into Harper's Diner thinking he was about to run the easiest intimidation stop of his week. A vague call. 2 black men. A room full of people who wouldn't want trouble. He moved straight to their booth, demanded identification, and acted like refusing him was the same thing as committing a crime. What he didn't realize was that one of the men sitting there wasn't just another civilian. Judge Nathaniel Brooks held a federal bench and knew exactly what Bennett could and couldn't do. The moment Brooks started pressing him for legal basis, Bennett's whole approach became a mistake that couldn't be undone because a body camera was rolling and customers were already lifting their phones. Before we get into how this started, tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you like stories where power trips get exposed and people get held to the rules, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Harper's Diner was the kind of place that ran on routine, morning regulars, coffee refills that came before you asked. A few cops stopped in sometimes, not because anyone loved the police, but because small towns tended to treat uniforms like part of the scenery. That morning, Judge Nathaniel Brooks sat with Calvin Reed in a booth near the back. They weren't hiding. They weren't loud. They were eating breakfast and talking the way old friends talked. Low voices, relaxed posture, no attention seeking. A call came over dispatch anyway. It wasn't tied to theft, violence, or any specific complaint about behavior. The report was vague enough to fit into a pattern that almost always meant the same thing. Someone saw two black men in a place they didn't expect and decided that discomfort counted as suspicion. Bennett arrived with that call in his head, and he entered the diner already committed to a conclusion. He didn't check in with staff. He didn't ask if anyone had caused an issue. He scanned the room once and locked onto Brooks and Calvin like the decision had been made before he opened the door. He walked up to their booth and demanded IDs. He didn't frame it as a request. He framed it as an order, like there was already a legal reason, and they were the ones stalling. Brooks didn't get dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He stayed seated, kept his hands visible, and asked Bennett what the legal basis was for the demand. The question sounded simple, but it landed hard, because it forced Bennett to explain what he hadn't bothered to establish. Bennett didn't answer the question cleanly. He leaned on the call. He treated the call itself like authority. He acted like the fact that someone had labeled them suspicious meant they now owed him compliance. Calvin watched Bennett closely. He had the look of someone who recognized the pattern and didn't want to give it fuel. His posture stayed controlled, but irritation sat right under the surface. Not panic, not fear. Frustration that this was happening in public over breakfast again. Bennett escalated quickly when he realized they weren't going to fold on the first command. He repeated the demand and started layering in pressure tactics. He suggested refusal would turn into a bigger problem. He hinted that they were making themselves look guilty. He added comments that weren't about safety or investigation and didn't belong in professional policing. He made it personal, and he made sure people nearby could hear it. That was the point. If he could embarrass them into compliance, he wouldn't need legal grounds. Brooks stayed calm and kept it procedural. He asked again what crime was being investigated and what specific facts supported a detention. He didn't talk like he was trying to win an argument. He talked like he was documenting a record in real time. Bennett responded by threatening arrest. He reached for the usual vague charges officers used when they wanted to punish someone for not submitting. He treated failure to identify like a universal rule, even though it didn't work that way. He talked about obstruction. He mentioned disorderly conduct, as if the act of sitting quietly and asking questions could become a disturbance just because he said so. Customers started paying attention. Forks slowed. Conversations dropped off. People didn't need legal training to recognize when an officer was pushing too hard with too little reason. Miguel Santos, the owner, noticed the shift and stepped out from behind the counter. He approached the booth with the calm urgency of someone trying to prevent his diner from turning into a scene. Miguel asked what was going on and why Bennett was demanding IDs from paying customers who were eating quietly. Bennett turned on him fast. He told Miguel to back off and implied that interfering would bring consequences. The tone carried a message that went beyond the moment. The badge outranked the business owner, and Bennett expected everyone to accept that. Miguel didn't take the bait. He didn't insult Bennett. He didn't get loud. He kept the focus on the facts. No one inside the diner had reported a crime. The men weren't causing a disturbance, and the officer didn't get to treat suspicion as a blank check. Bennett doubled down. He tried to control the room by controlling the narrative. He raised his voice slightly and used officer safety language as cover, even though Brooks and Calvin hadn't moved in a threatening way. He positioned himself like he wanted the camera angles, his body cam, the customers' phones, to show him in charge. That didn't work the way he expected, because the same cameras also captured what started this: a vague call, a targeted approach, and escalating threats without a clear legal foundation. More customers pulled out phones. Some recorded openly, others held their devices lower. Either way, Bennett was surrounded by witnesses who weren't relying on memory anymore. Brooks noticed. Calvin noticed. Miguel noticed too. The power balance shifted the moment multiple recordings started. Bennett tried to force the old balance back into place. He demanded IDs again. He talked about taking them outside. He hinted that if they didn't comply, he'd make the situation worse for them. Brooks didn't match his aggression. He stayed composed and stayed specific. He made it clear he wasn't refusing because he had something to hide. He was refusing because Bennett hadn't articulated a lawful reason. That calmness irritated Bennett more than anger would have. Anger gives an officer an excuse to claim a threat. Calm, precise questioning takes that excuse away and leaves only the officer's decisions. Bennett slipped and revealed what was actually driving him. He made statements that had nothing to do with a specific investigation and everything to do with whether Brooks and Calvin belonged there. The moment wasn't subtle. It was the kind of talk that showed bias without needing interpretation. Brooks didn't argue about feelings. He moved the situation towards accountability. He identified himself. He gave his name and his position as a federal judge in a straightforward way, without showmanship. He didn't wave it like a weapon. He stated it like a fact that Bennett needed to understand immediately. Bennett's demeanor changed on the spot. His voice softened. His posture adjusted. He tried to shrink the moment down into something harmless, like he'd been doing a normal check, and it had simply reached its end. That attempt didn't land, because the escalation had already happened, and it had already been captured. Brooks didn't let him rewrite it. He requested a supervisor. He made it clear he wanted the incident documented and the recordings preserved. He didn't threaten Bennett personally. He didn't grandstand. He kept it about process and law. Calvin stayed steady beside him. He didn't jump into a speech. He didn't antagonize. His restraint mattered because it denied Bennett the chaos he could have used as cover. Miguel stood his ground too. He didn't apologize for defending his customers, and he didn't accept being treated like a suspect in his own business. By the time Bennett tried to step away, he wasn't controlling the scene anymore. He was trapped inside his own footage, surrounded by witnesses who had watched him escalate from a baseless demand to threats and intimidation. That was how breakfast at Harper's Diner turned into the beginning of a case. Judge Brooks didn't let the diner incident fade into a "we'll look into it" promise. He moved fast because he knew how this usually went when people waited. Memories got fuzzy, footage got overwritten, and the official report became the only story anyone was expected to believe. He started by locking down every source of video. Miguel confirmed Harper's Diner had security cameras that covered the dining area and entrance, and he agreed to export the entire time window around Bennett's arrival. Brooks made sure Miguel kept an extra copy as well. No single point of failure. Calvin focused on witnesses. He didn't try to recruit a crowd. He identified the customers closest to the booth, got names and numbers, and asked who was willing to give a written statement. Several agreed on the spot, especially the ones who had already recorded on their phones. They understood that a video clip alone didn't cover everything. Tone, threats, and the way Bennett tried to pressure people into handing over IDs needed context. Brooks also submitted formal requests immediately. He requested the Bodycam footage, the dispatch audio for the original call, and any reports Bennett filed connected to the incident. He didn't do it as a casual ask. He did it through the proper channels, with the expectation that the department would preserve evidence and document its handling. While all that was happening, the public side kicked off without anyone needing to coordinate it. Customers posted clips from their phones. Those videos traveled because they were straightforward. An officer entered on a vague, suspicious call, singled out two black men eating breakfast, demanded IDs without explaining a specific crime, then escalated into threats when they asked basic legal questions. People didn't share it because it was dramatic. They shared it because it looked familiar. By midday, Harper's Diner had strangers calling and messaging. Local pages were reposting. A few larger accounts picked it up and framed it for what it was: profiling dressed up as policing. The judge reveal added fuel, but the initial minutes were what did the real damage to Bennett, because they showed his intent before he realized who he was dealing with. The department released a short statement saying it was reviewing the situation. No details, no admission. The usual holding pattern. Brooks didn't respond with a social media war. He kept it procedural. His complaint laid out a clean timeline. Bennett's initial demand, the lack of a clear legal basis, the threats of arrest, the hostility toward Miguel, and the shift in Bennett's demeanor once Brooks identified himself. Calvan's statement backed it up, from the perspective of the person sitting next to him, watching the escalation happen step by step. Miguel added his own complaint. He described the moment Bennett tried to intimidate him for speaking up as the owner. That mattered because it showed Bennett wasn't only targeting the men in the booth, he was also trying to silence anyone who interfered. Once Internal Affairs had those filings, they couldn't treat this like a simple misunderstanding between an officer and two diners. There were too many independent recordings, too many witnesses, and too clear a question at the center of it. What lawful reason did Bennett have to detain them and demand identification? The next stage was predictable. Bennett went on administrative leave. Leadership framed it as standard protocol, but everyone understood what it really meant. The city was trying to reduce the risk while they figured out whether they could defend him. That's when investigators pulled Bennett's record. Earlier complaints hadn't disappeared. They'd been filed, minimized, and closed without real consequences. The details varied, but the theme stayed consistent: racially biased stops, vague justifications, and a tendency to get aggressive when someone questioned him. Some complaints included people saying he threatened them with arrest for things that weren't crimes. Others described him demanding IDs in situations where there was no clear reason beyond, "I want to know who you are." The diner incident forced those older complaints into the light. When video shows the same tactics people have been reporting for years, the department loses the ability to call everyone confused or unreliable. Then the body cam footage surfaced publicly. It didn't help Bennett. It showed him walking in with a plan, not with questions. It captured his tone as he escalated from demand to threat. It also made one part impossible to explain away. Once he learned Brooks was a federal judge, he changed instantly. Softer voice, less bravado, a sudden push to end the encounter cleanly. That contrast told the real story. He wasn't just doing his job. He was doing what he thought he could get away with, until he realized the person in front of him had the power and credibility to make it stick. By the end of that week, the department's messaging shifted again. They stopped hinting at confusion. They started talking about policy adherence and community concerns. That language change was subtle, but it meant one thing. They knew Bennett was turning into a liability they couldn't carry. And Brooks and Calvin weren't backing off. They were preparing to take it past internal discipline and into civil court, where evidence matters more than excuses. Once the body cam footage circulated, the department stopped treating Bennett like a normal employee problem and started treating him like a lawsuit risk. You could see it in their behavior. Fewer casual statements, more lawyers in the room, more careful wording. Judge Brooks and Calvin Reed didn't let them drag it out. Their attorney sent a preservation notice to the city and the department, covering everything tied to Bennett and the diner call. Dispatch recordings, CAD notes, body cam metadata, radio traffic, patrol car GPS, prior complaint files, training records, supervisor reviews, discipline history, and any internal messages about the incident. That notice mattered because it cut off the most common escape route, claiming something wasn't saved. Miguel Santos added pressure from a different angle. He confirmed he would cooperate with any investigation and any civil case. and he gave a formal statement about being threatened in his own business. That expanded the story beyond two customers versus an officer. It turned into an officer tried to intimidate an entire room. Internal Affairs finished their review faster than usual, not because the system suddenly became efficient, but because the evidence left almost no space to argue. Bennett had demanded IDs without a clear legal basis. He escalated when questioned. He used arrest threats to force compliance. He directed the same intimidation toward Miguel when Miguel spoke up. The recordings also showed how Bennett's tone changed once he realized Brooks had institutional power. Then the deeper review of Bennett's history landed like a brick. Investigators didn't just see a few isolated complaints. They saw repetition across years, stops initiated for vague reasons, complaints describing similar language, patterns in who was targeted, multiple occasions where supervisors closed concerns with soft corrective action and no sustained finding. That became a second scandal on top of the diner incident. The department had warnings and chose not to treat them like warnings. At that point, the department had two options: defend Bennett publicly and hope the public got tired, or cut him loose and try to contain the damage. They chose containment. Bennett was terminated. The department framed it as a policy and conduct failure tied to the diner incident, but the public understood what it really was. The videos forced their hand. Bennett didn't go quietly. He tried to justify himself through informal channels, claiming he was responding to a call and doing what he thought was appropriate. That defense didn't hold up because the call itself had been vague and biased, and his actions didn't match a legitimate investigation. The more he tried to explain, the worse it sounded. Then the civil rights lawsuit hit. Brooks and Calvin filed claims alleging racial discrimination, unlawful detention, and retaliation threats connected to their refusal to comply with an unlawful demand. They also targeted the department and city for failures in training, supervision, and discipline, arguing the department had earlier warning signs and didn't act. Miguel's role strengthened the case. He wasn't the target of the suspicious call, yet Bennett still threatened him when he defended customers. That supported the argument that Bennett wasn't acting out of safety concerns. He was using the badge to control people who didn't submit. The city's legal team tried to steer the case toward quiet resolution. They pushed for behind-the-scenes negotiation, hoping to avoid depositions that would force supervisors to explain why Bennett's earlier complaints were handled the way they were. Brooks understood the leverage. He didn't need a loud public campaign. The record spoke for itself. Multiple recordings, a body cam angle, security footage, witnesses who weren't connected to him, dispatch audio showing how weak the original call was, complaint history establishing a pattern. That's the kind of package that makes a city nervous, because a jury doesn't need complicated legal theory to understand it. The city settled. They paid a significant amount rather than gamble on trial, especially with a federal judge as a plaintiff and a mountain of video evidence already in the public conversation. Settlements don't always equal justice, but they do signal one thing: the city didn't believe it could win cleanly. The settlement terms also pushed change. The department tightened rules around ID demands and consensual contacts, requiring officers to clearly document the legal basis for detentions and discouraging phishing for identification without articulable reasons. Bodycam review expanded, not just when something went viral, but through routine auditing so patterns could be caught earlier. Complaint intake procedures changed, so repeat allegations weren't dismissed as unrelated noise. Bias training became mandatory, with clearer discipline for violations instead of vague coaching. The department also faced community consequences that money couldn't fix quickly. People didn't forget the first few minutes of that diner footage. They remembered an officer walking in confident he could treat two black men like suspects for existing in a booth. They remembered the threats. They remembered the tone shift the instant Brooks identified himself. That contrast damaged trust more than any single insult ever could, because it showed Bennett understood what he was doing and only got cautious when power sat across from him. For Brooks and Calvin, the outcome wasn't about feeling vindicated. They already knew what happened. It was about preventing the department from pretending it was a one-time mistake. The record forced the city to admit risk, forced the department to act, and warned other officers watching the fallout that this conduct could cost them their job. Miguel stayed open for business, but he didn't go back to pretending neutrality was safety. He made it clear Harper's Diner served everyone, and he backed that up with action when it mattered most. That's the lesson here. Power tries to win through speed and intimidation. Cam and documentation slow it down. Clear boundaries expose it. Cameras finish the job. If you were sitting in that booth, so what would you have done? Handed over the ID to end it, or asked the same question Brooks asked and made the officer explain himself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it. And subscribe for more stories where accountability actually shows up.
We need to ask a few questions and look at your business records right now.
Before anything, identify yourself clearly, name an agency, and tell me if you have a warrant.
It's just preliminary. It'll be quick if you cooperate.
Do you have a warrant or a court order, yes or no?
You're not in a position to refuse.
This is private property that I own.
The lead agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration walked into that Savannah bakery like he already had permission. He acted like the staff were going to fall in line, answer questions on the spot, and hand over records without slowing him down. He did not bring a warrant. He did not present a court order. He brought confidence, a badge, and the assumption that would be enough. That assumption collapsed when Dr. Alana Pierce stepped forward. She was not a frightened employee trying to keep her job. She owned the business and the building. She had built legitimate companies for years, and she understood exactly how government requests were supposed to work. The agent, Trent Callahan, treated the moment like a routine squeeze. Pierce treated it like a legal boundary. Right after this hook, quick question for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you like seeing people hold their ground and force accountability, hit like and subscribe. These situations only go one way when nobody pushes back. Now, here's how it started. It was March 2020, midday, Savannah, Georgia. The bakery was busy in the normal way. Customers waited near the counter. Staff moved between the register and the prep area. The space was open enough that most people could hear what was happening without trying. Two agents entered together. Callahan led. His partner stayed close, quiet, and watchful. They approached the counter and started pressing for what they described as preliminary questioning and access to business records. The request was framed like a simple step, as if it would be strange to hesitate. Pierce did not argue feelings or speculate about their reasons. She immediately focused on process. She required identification shown clearly, not a quick flash. Names, agency, and purpose needed to be visible. Then she asked the only question that mattered for what they were demanding, whether they had a warrant. When they did not produce one, she told them they were not getting records, and they were not questioning her staff inside her business. Callahan shifted tactics fast. He tried to make refusal sound suspicious. He leaned on authority instead of law. He implied that cooperation would make life easier and resistance would create problems. Pierce stayed calm and consistent. She repeated that the building was private property she owned, and that he had no legal right to take records or conduct questioning there without proper authorization. She also told him to leave. That was the moment the room changed. Customers started watching closely. Staff stopped moving as casually as they had been. Phones came out first discreetly and then openly. People were not filming for entertainment. They were filming because they could sense the agent was pushing past what sounded reasonable. Callahan noticed the cameras and did not like it. His posture tightened and his tone sharpened. He stopped trying to sound polite and started applying pressure more directly. He raised the threat level by using the language of obstruction. suggesting that Pierce was committing a crime by refusing to comply. That move was the turning point because it revealed what he was really doing. He was not following a lawful process and hitting a wall. He was trying to convert a lawful refusal into an excuse for control. Pierce did not give him the reaction he wanted. She did not yell. She did not insult him. She did not step aside. She held the same position. Show legal authority or leave. The steadiness made Callahan's escalation look worse, especially in front of witnesses. Then he escalated again. He moved closer in a way meant to intimidate and signal physical enforcement. His partner stayed in place, still quiet, still backing the posture. Staff and customers kept recording. In a packed bakery, everyone could see that the owner was simply asserting her rights in her own building, while a federal agent tried to force compliance without a warrant. Callahan began moving as if an arrest was the next step, even though Pierce had not attacked anyone or interfered with an investigation. She had refused warrantless access and demanded they leave private property. That is when Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker arrived. She did not walk in confused. She assessed quickly and took control. She separated the agents from Pierce and shut down the obstruction threat immediately. She ordered the agents to leave the bakery and made it clear the encounter had crossed a serious line. Callahan attempted to hold on to the situation, but the authority dynamic had changed. Once a supervisor publicly stops an agent mid-escalation, the attempt to force an arrest loses all cover. The agents left under Whitaker's direction. Pierce stayed composed through the exit. She did not chase them out or perform for the cameras. She focused on ending the unlawful pressure and keeping her staff safe. The bakery returned to normal movement, but the moment did not fade. Multiple people had recorded it from different angles, and the business had its own cameras as well. The evidence existed, and it was already spreading beyond the room. Footage from inside that bakery hit the internet the same day. Not because Pierce chased attention, but because there were too many witnesses and too many angles for it to stay private. People posted clips, others reposted them, and soon the story wasn't just agents visited a business. Viewers saw a federal agent pushing for questioning and records without a warrant, then threatening arrest when the owner refused. That detail made it spread faster. Most people don't know the fine points of search law, but they understand a basic line. Show legal authority if you want access to private records. The video made it obvious that the pressure came first and the paperwork came never. Comment sections filled with the same reactions. Some were angry and some were scared, a lot were personal. Business owners talked about agents showing up and acting like consent was mandatory. Former employees of different agencies weighed in about how often "just cooperate" got used as a shortcut around actual procedure. Local Savannah pages picked it up next. Then regional outlets. Then national coverage followed, because the clip was simple to understand and hard to defend. Inside the agency, the tone changed the moment the video started trending. Supervisors did not treat it like a minor misunderstanding. The footage showed the full sequence: the demand, the refusal, the threat, the attempted escalation, and the supervisor intervention. It also showed witnesses recording. That mattered because it eliminated the usual wiggle room where reports get written to make the scene sound cleaner than it looked. Whitaker's decision to pull the agents out immediately became the agency's first problem and its first protection at the same time. Her intervention protected the public and reduced harm in the moment, but it also signaled something else. Leadership recognized this as a serious violation right away. That meant they could not later pretend it was unclear. If a senior supervisor had to stop it in real time, it was already past the boundary. Reporters and activists began looking into Callahan within days. They found what Pierce's community already suspected. The bakery incident wasn't an isolated bad day. Complaints existed. Patterns existed. Prior claims involved aggressive tactics, warrantless or legally questionable searches, and confrontations that targeted black citizens more often than coincidence could explain away. The public didn't need every document to understand the core contradiction. Callahan stayed in the field because his statistics looked productive. Arrests, seizures, cases closed. Leadership had rewarded outcomes while minimizing the cost of how those outcomes were produced. That trade-off became the real story. People started asking how many complaints were needed before someone like Callahan got pulled off the street. One complaint could be noise. Two could be conflict. A long string across years with similar allegations is a warning, yet the warning had been managed instead of addressed. Whitaker's name surfaced too, and the reaction split. Some praised her because she showed up, took control, and stopped it. Others asked why it took a public incident to trigger real action. That question didn't land on her alone. It landed on the full supervisory chain that had kept Callahan moving from one situation to the next. Pierce stayed disciplined during the media storm. She did not present herself as a victim begging for sympathy. She presented herself as a business owner defending a lawful boundary. Her focus stayed on what viewers could see. No warrant, no access, no intimidation allowed on private property. That calm approach did something important. It prevented the story from drifting into personality drama. It forced everyone to talk about policy, training, oversight, and accountability. Pressure mounted fast. Community leaders demanded answers. Business associations asked for clarity on what owners should do when agents appear without paperwork. Civil rights organizations highlighted the broader pattern. Good numbers can hide bad conduct for years if supervisors choose to look away. Within the agency, an internal review started moving with urgency. This was not the slow-motion process people usually expect. Visibility changes everything. The recordings made it difficult to deny. The witness count made it difficult to rewrite. Public attention made it difficult to delay. Callahan's partner became a secondary focus. Viewers saw him standing there while Callahan escalated. He did not take the lead, but he also did not stop it. That difference mattered later when disciplined decisions came down. Meanwhile, Pierce started preparing for what accountability actually looks like when the cameras stop. She gathered her own evidence. Security footage, employee statements, business documentation showing ownership and control of the property. She also documented the impact on operations, staff stress, and reputational risk. Smart move. Civil rights cases don't win on vibes. They win on facts, timelines, and clean records. A civil rights attorney entered the picture soon after. This was not a lawyer looking for quick headlines. It was someone who understood federal litigation and knew how juries react to abuse of authority when it is clearly recorded. The strategy wasn't just to argue that Pierce felt mistreated. The strategy was to show a pattern, show intent, and show the agency's tolerance of that pattern. By the end of the first stretch of coverage, the agency faced two problems at the same time. One problem was Callahan's conduct in that bakery. The bigger problem was what the bakery incident revealed about the system around him. The agency moved quickly once it became clear the footage was not going away. Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker wrote the kind of incident summary that leaves no room for creative interpretation. Her report centered on what the public already saw. Two agents demanded access to records and attempted questioning inside a private business without a warrant, then escalated into threats when the owner asserted a basic constitutional boundary. That framing mattered because it forced the internal review to focus on legality and protocol instead of personality. Investigators pulled everything tied to that visit. They reviewed body-worn footage where it existed, camera footage from the bakery, and the phone videos posted online. They interviewed staff and customers. They collected ownership documentation that confirmed Pierce's control of the property. They also looked at what Callahan claimed he was doing there in the first place, because preliminary questioning without a warrant often hides a simple reality: fishing for something that can later be used to justify bigger action. Callahan tried to defend it as standard fieldwork. He pushed the idea that he was pursuing leads and expected cooperation. He framed Pierce as unhelpful. He leaned on the obstruction angle again, arguing that her refusal interfered with his job. That argument didn't hold up under review, because refusing warrantless access is not obstruction. It is the system working as designed. The moment he threatened arrest over that refusal, the situation stopped being a misunderstanding and became an abuse of authority problem. Whitaker's role also got examined, and she passed that test in a way that mattered. She arrived, assessed quickly, took command, removed the agents, and treated it as a serious violation immediately. The agency could not claim ignorance about the problem because a supervisor recognized it on site. Her intervention didn't excuse what happened before she arrived, but it did establish that leadership had a clear chance to stop harm in real time, and did it. Then the review expanded beyond that day. Once the bakery incident made Callahan's name public, complaints that had been sitting in the background became part of the record again. Internal affairs files, prior supervisory notes, and documented concerns from earlier encounters got pulled into the same timeline. The pattern was the same one the public was already talking about: aggressive approaches, questionable searches, repeated conflict with black citizens, and a tendency to treat consent like something he could demand. The most damaging point for the agency was not just that complaints existed. It was that the agency had options earlier and did not use them in a way that protected the public. You can counsel, you can retrain, you can restrict duties, you can pull someone from field operations, you can assign oversight. Someone made choices repeatedly that kept Callahan in situations where his approach produced predictable outcomes. That became the heart of the accountability conversation. Within weeks, Callahan lost his job. The termination was fast by federal standards because the case was clean. Clear conduct, clear video, clear supervisory intervention, and clear public pressure. Leadership could not drag it out quietly without making the agency look like it was protecting him again. Discipline hit the partner too, but it landed differently. He wasn't the one driving the confrontation, yet his presence mattered. He watched it happen and backed the posture without stopping it. Internal discipline reflected that difference in role, but the stain didn't wash off. Over time, he ended up leaving the agency. Pierce didn't treat those personnel moves as the finish line. She understood the basic problem. Termination handles one person. It does not address the system that tolerated the pattern long enough to let him walk into her business and try it again. So she filed a civil rights lawsuit. The complaint focused on unlawful pressure, abuse of authority, and the attempted use of arrest threats as leverage to obtain cooperation without legal process. Her legal team framed the case around constitutional violations and the practical damage caused when federal agents act as if warrants are optional. Discovery turned the case into a spotlight. Pierce's attorneys demanded the internal history connected to Callahan's conduct: prior complaints, internal communications, performance reviews, any documentation showing how leadership evaluated him and why he stayed in the field. The agency fought to limit what had to be produced because patterns are hard to defend once a jury sees them lined up in order. Pierce's side also prepared like professionals. Security footage was organized and preserved. Witnesses were identified early, not just staff, but customers, who recorded and remembered details. Business records were ready to show ownership and private property control. They also documented operational disruption, staff stress, and reputational consequences after the video spread. That matters in court because defendants love to minimize harm and call it a brief interaction. It was not brief for the people inside the bakery. It became a public event with real impact. As the trial date got closer, settlement discussions floated in and out. The agency had incentives to settle quietly. Pierce had incentives to push forward. She wasn't only seeking compensation. She wanted a verdict that said clearly that intimidation without legal authority is not law enforcement. That decision came with risk, because trials always do. Still, the recordings and witnesses shaped the case in a way defendants hate. Video shrinks the space for storytelling. It forces accountability to attach to behavior instead of excuses. By the time the case reached the courtroom calendar, the question wasn't whether the confrontation happened. The question was what the system was going to pay for allowing it to happen the way it did. Trial made everything sharper. In pretrial motions, the agency's attorneys tried narrowing what the jury would hear. They pushed to limit discussion of prior complaints and tried framing the bakery incident as a tense but isolated event. Pierce's side argued the opposite. The bakery incident only made sense when the jury understood why Callahan felt comfortable escalating without a warrant in a room full of witnesses. The judge allowed key parts of the record in. That shifted the whole case. Once jurors heard there had been earlier complaints with similar themes, the bakery footage stopped looking like a one-off mistake and started looking like the predictable result of tolerated behavior. Pierce testified with the same discipline she showed in the bakery. She laid out the sequence clearly. 2 agents arrived. They demanded immediate questioning and access to business records. No warrant appeared. She required credentials and lawful authority. Callahan escalated into obstruction language and moved toward an arrest, even though she stayed compliant and calm. She explained why she refused. She was protecting her staff and her business from a warrantless phishing attempt in her own building. Witnesses backed her up. Staff described how Callahan's tone shifted and how the threat level rose once Pierce did not give in. Customers confirmed the same thing from the other side of the room. Several videos in the bakery's security footage matched their accounts, and that consistency mattered because jurors don't like guessing. They like proof. Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker also became a key piece of the story. Her arrival and decision to stop the agents in real time carried weight with the jury. It told them someone with authority saw the conduct and treated it as a problem immediately. That undercut any attempt to paint Pierce as difficult or uncooperative in a way that justified escalation. Callahan's defense tried the standard pivot. They argued he was doing his job, following leads, relying on experience, and dealing with someone who would not cooperate. They tried saying the obstruction language was a lawful warning. Pierce's attorneys kept dragging it back to one simple issue: legal process. No warrant, no authority to demand private records on the spot. No lawful basis to turn a refusal into an arrest threat. Then they added the point that hit hardest. Callahan didn't just ask. He pressured. He threatened. He tried to force compliance by manufacturing consequences. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a tactic. Closing arguments focused on punishment, not just repair. Pierce's team asked the jury to treat the case as a message about power. They argued that if an agent could walk into a business, demand records without paperwork, threaten arrest when refused, and face no serious consequences, then constitutional limits become optional in practice. They also pointed out the agency had warning signs long before this bakery and still kept him in the field. The jury came back with a verdict that made it clear they understood exactly what they were deciding. They awarded Dr. Alana Pierce $24.2 million in damages. The size of the award signaled more than compensation. It signaled punishment for abuse of authority and for a system that let the pattern continue until it became impossible to ignore. After the verdict, consequences kept rolling. Callahan was already gone, but the public now saw why he should have been removed earlier. The partner's discipline looked lighter by comparison, yet it still ended the same way over time. He left the agency. Supervisors faced internal heat too, because once a case becomes a national example, leadership cannot pretend the problem was invisible. Pierce did not treat the verdict like a personal trophy. She used it as leverage. Public testimony came first. She spoke about what happened in plain terms and kept her focus on business owners and workers who get pressured because agents expect compliance without paperwork. Then she helped build a legal support effort aimed at protecting other business owners facing unlawful searches and intimidation. It was practical help, not speeches. Guidance on what to ask, what to record, and how to document the encounter without escalating it. Community pressure followed that work. Local business groups pushed for clearer agency policies on contact with businesses. Civil rights groups used the case to argue for earlier intervention when complaint patterns appear. The public conversation shifted from, "This agent acted badly," to, "Why did the system keep putting him in position to act this way?" That's the part that stuck. This story did not end with one supervisor doing the right thing or one jury issuing a big number. The real critique was bigger and uglier. The system failed repeatedly by tolerating a documented pattern because the outcomes looked good on paper. The bakery incident only became the breaking point because it was filmed, witnessed, and impossible to spin. So here's the question people kept asking after the verdict. Why does accountability start after the 17th complaint in a viral video instead of after the first verified pattern? Drop your answer in the comments. What would you have done if federal agents came into your business demanding records without a warrant? Would you have stayed calm like Pierce did, or would the pressure have worked? If you want more real, grounded stories where power gets checked and accountability actually lands, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more.
Ma'am, step back. Your kid is a thief.
Who reported a theft? What was taken?
He fits the description. I know what I saw.
You still haven't named a complainant. He's 10 years old. You're restraining a child with no victim in front of you and nothing recovered.
I know. Stay right here with me.
This mall officer walked in thinking he was about to bag an easy confession from a kid he'd already decided was guilty. What he didn't know was that the boy's mother wasn't the kind of person you could intimidate into silence. She was a federal judge. And when she stepped into frame, the whole situation flipped from security doing its job to a documented example of unlawful profiling on a minor. Before we get into it, tell us where you're watching from, your state or country. And if you stick around for stories where cameras force accountability in real time, hit like and subscribe. This one turned into a public lesson because everything was recorded. The body camera footage started in a busy corridor near the food court. It was the part of the mall where people always slowed down. Bags in hand, kids asking for snacks, shoppers stopping to check receipts. A bench sat along the wall and several groups had set shopping bags nearby while they looked through their purchases. Malik Carter, 10 years old, stood a few feet from that bench. He wasn't crouched over anyone's things. He wasn't reaching into bags. He looked like a kid waiting for an adult to come back. Hands close to his sides, attention bouncing between the crowd and the storefronts. Officer Brent Halverson entered the scene already locked in. He didn't scan the area for a complainant. He didn't ask nearby shoppers if anything was missing. He came straight to Malik and treated him like the crime had already been confirmed. The officer began accusing the child of pickpocketing. No victim got identified on camera. No missing item got described. Nothing was recovered. The reason stayed vague, built on Malik's proximity to bags and the officer's assumptions about who looked like a thief. Then the language slipped out. Not subtle, not accidental. The officer repeatedly used "your type" and "you people" while pressing the boy. That matters because it showed what the stop was really based on, not evidence. A category in the officer's head. Malik reacted the way a lot of kids react when an adult with authority corners them in public. He looked scared and confused, trying to answer while also trying not to make the situation worse. He kept insisting he hadn't taken anything, but the officer didn't slow down to actually verify whether a theft had even happened. That's when the officer's approach started to look less like an investigation and more like a squeeze. He kept pushing for an admission. He framed it like Malik only had one way out, agreeing with the accusation. Naomi Carter, Malik's mother, came into view from the side. She'd been a short distance away grabbing a drink and a small bag from a kiosk. From the moment she noticed the officer crowding her son, her pace changed. She didn't rush in wildly. She moved with purpose, stepping close enough to place herself between Malik and the officer's forward angle without touching anyone. Her first move wasn't emotion, it was structure. She challenged the accusation by asking for the basics any reasonable person would ask for. She wanted to know who reported the pickpocketing. She asked what exactly was taken. She asked where the alleged victim was. She asked what evidence the officer had that Malik did anything at all. The officer didn't give clean answers because there weren't clean answers to give. He leaned on the same general suspicion and tried to treat her questions like she was interfering. His tone hardened. He repeated the same biased framing, suggesting Malik fit a type, using that "you people" language again like it was normal. Naomi didn't mirror his volume. She stayed controlled and kept pulling the conversation back to facts. A missing wallet has an owner. A theft has a complainant. A detention needs legal grounds. None of that appeared on the footage. As the questioning tightened around him, the officer changed tactics. He shifted from trying to argue to trying to control the scene physically. The body cam captured his hand reaching out and closing around Malik's wrist. It wasn't a guiding touch. It was a holding grip, meant to prevent the child from moving away. Malik visibly tensed, shoulders up, body stiff, eyes wide. People nearby started paying attention. A couple of bystanders slowed down. At least one phone came up, pointed directly at the officer and the child. Naomi immediately demanded the officer release her son. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She gave a clear instruction and kept her focus on the fact that Malik was 10 years old and was being restrained without an identified victim or any recovered property. The officer refused to let go. Instead, he escalated again, framing it as a detention and acting like the lack of evidence didn't matter because his suspicion was enough. Then his free hand moved toward his belt, and the camera angle made it obvious what he was reaching for. Handcuffs. Not because he had probable cause. Not because a victim stood there pointing at Malik. Not because property had been found. It was a pressure move, aimed at a scared child and a mother who wouldn't back down. Naomi didn't step back. She also didn't give him anything to twist into resisting. Her posture stayed firm. Her questions stayed focused. Meanwhile, you could see bystanders committing to recording, because everyone could feel the line had been crossed. And that's where part one ends. An officer holding a 10-year-old by the wrist with cuffs coming out, no victim in sight, no evidence on hand, and a mother who's clearly building a record, calmly, deliberately, because she already knows how accountability actually works. The officer kept Malik's wrist locked while Naomi stood close enough to shield her son without touching the officer. The camera picked up her voice, staying steady, and that steadiness did something important. It forced the chaos to look like what it really was. A grown man restraining a 10-year-old with no clear reason. Naomi stayed on the same track. She kept asking for the complainant. She asked for the missing property. She asked for a description that existed before Malik got singled out. She asked what specific action the officer saw that justified grabbing a child. The officer couldn't anchor the stop to anything real, so he leaned harder on attitude and intimidation. He talked like he was doing Naomi a favor by handling it quietly. He framed her questions as obstruction. He acted like she should be grateful he hadn't taken this further. Meanwhile, the only person who had taken it further was him. The "your type" and "you people" language came back again while he tried to justify why Malik stood out to him. He didn't describe behavior. He described a category. That's what made nearby shoppers start paying attention in a different way. People weren't just curious anymore. They looked concerned. A woman near the bench raised her phone higher. Another bystander stepped into the edge of the frame and stayed there watching the officer's hands. A man with shopping bags slowed down and didn't move on. You could tell the crowd sensed the moment turning. Naomi noticed it too. She didn't play to the audience, but she used the presence of witnesses the right way. She kept her words tight and factual, like she was building a record that would hold up later, even if someone tried to twist it. She made it clear Malik wasn't leaving with the officer unless the officer could explain the legal grounds. She pointed out that there was still no identified victim. She highlighted that no stolen item had been recovered. She flagged that Malik's age mattered because this wasn't an adult being stopped for a verified report. This was a child being pressured to confess to something unconfirmed. The officer's response was to squeeze for compliance. His grip on Malik didn't loosen. He shifted his stance to angle Malik away from his mother, like he wanted to separate them by inches at a time. His free hand hovered at his belt again, and the body cam captured him touching the handcuff case, like he wanted Naomi to see it. That's not procedure. That's theater. Malik started to look at his mother instead of the officer, like he was searching for the right way to behave. Kids do that when they feel trapped. His body stayed stiff, and he tried to keep his hands visible, like he'd learned somewhere that visible hands keep adults calmer. Naomi kept control of her tone, but she didn't soften her boundary. She demanded the officer release Malik's wrist. She repeated that a detention without a victim, without property, and without a clear report was unlawful. She reminded him that he didn't get to invent probable cause out of a guess and then use cuffs to force a confession. The officer didn't like that word, unlawful. His face tightened. His voice rose. He tried to flip it into a power contest, insisting he had authority and that Naomi needed to step back. He kept framing Malik as suspicious, and he kept talking like suspicion itself was the evidence. That's when Naomi changed tactics slightly. Still calm, still controlled. She stopped chasing his answers and started anchoring the moment to accountability. She told him she wanted his name and badge number for the report. She told him to preserve the body cam footage. She told him to call a supervisor immediately, not later. Immediately. That request hit him differently because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't a plea. It sounded like someone used to oversight. The officer hesitated for the first time. You could see it. A tiny pause, a quick glance around, the awareness that phones were up and people weren't walking away anymore. He tried to regain momentum by escalating again. He started to pull the handcuffs out fully, bringing them into view. He used them like a lever, like showing metal would make Malik crumble and Naomi back off. Instead, the opposite happened. A bystander spoke up from off camera, loud enough that the body cam caught it, calling attention to the fact that Malik was a child and asking what the evidence actually was. Another voice said they had the whole thing recorded. The crowd energy shifted from watching to documenting. Naomi stayed focused. She didn't argue with bystanders. She didn't let the situation scatter. Her attention stayed on the officer's hands, the wrist grip, the cuffs, and the fact that he still couldn't point to a victim. Then the officer made the mistake that ended any chance of him playing this off later. He repeated the biased language again, even more openly, while justifying why Malik was the one he stopped. He tried to dress it up as experience, but it landed like pure prejudice on camera in front of witnesses, while he held a 10-year-old. Naomi didn't react with outrage. She reacted like someone confirming a final detail. Her posture straightened. Her voice stayed even. She stopped negotiating and moved into command mode. The cuffs were out now. Not on Malik yet, but close enough that everyone understood what the officer wanted. Fear, compliance, a confession he could write down and call it resolved. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't step into the officer. She didn't touch his equipment. She just tightened the frame of the situation so it couldn't be spun later. She told him again to release Malik's wrist. She reminded him again that there was no identified victim and no recovered property. She pointed out again that he still hadn't described a specific theft report, only his personal suspicion. The officer tried to bulldoze past that. He kept talking like Naomi's refusal to accept his assumption was the real problem. He leaned on authority words and implied consequences if she didn't cooperate. He also kept referring to Malik in group terms, like Malik didn't get to be an individual child, only a stereotype. That "your type, you people" framing stayed in the audio, clear as day. And you could feel the crowd locking in. Phones stayed raised. People stopped pretending they weren't watching. Someone moved to the side for a better angle. Another person stayed near the bench, eyes on the officer's hands, ready to speak up. If he tried to drag Malik away, the officer noticed the cameras and, instead of backing off, he tried to control the narrative. He started talking like he was doing the right thing and keeping them all safe. He framed Malik as suspicious because he was near bags. He implied Malik must have been working the crowd. Still no victim. Still no missing item. Still nothing tangible. Naomi shifted her attention to pure procedure. She demanded a supervisor again. She demanded the officer's full name and ID again. She made it clear she wanted an incident report filed and the body cam preserved. She said it like it wasn't a request. It was a directive. That's when the officer tried to end it the way he wanted. He tightened his grip on Malik's wrist and angled the cuffs forward like he was about to put them on. Not because he had legal grounds, but because he wanted to force Naomi to either submit or cause a scene. Either way, he thought he'd win. He misread her. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't argue about his feelings. She didn't threaten him with vague connections. She did something sharper. She identified herself. Calmly, clearly, she stated she was a federal judge. Then she laid out the problem in plain terms. He was profiling a minor, detaining a 10-year-old without an identified victim, without recovered property, and without lawful grounds. She told him to release her son immediately. No yelling, no theatrics, just a statement of role and a statement of law. That's the moment the officer's whole body language changed. The cuffs stopped moving forward. His shoulders shifted. His head turned slightly, like his brain was suddenly running a different calculation. He glanced towards the phones around him, then back to Naomi. You could see him realizing he wasn't in control of the story anymore. He tried to talk his way out fast. He started reframing it as a misunderstanding. He implied he was just checking. He softened his tone and tried to make it sound like he'd never been aggressive at all. The video didn't support that. The grip on Malik's wrist had been steady for too long. The biased language had been said too many times. The cuffs had been out. Everyone saw it. Naomi didn't let him rewrite it in real time. She repeated the instruction. Release Malik. She also demanded the supervisor now, not after the fact. She told him to step back and stop engaging with her child. The officer finally loosened his hand and let go of Malik's wrist. Malik stepped closer to his mother immediately, staying tight to her side. His breathing looked shallow. He didn't look like a kid who'd just been checked. He looked like a kid who'd just been scared on purpose. A bystander spoke loud enough for the body cam to catch that they had the whole interaction recorded. Another person said the biased language was on video too. The officer heard it. You could see it hit him. He started trying to clean up the scene by lowering his voice and looking around as if he was searching for a victim to appear and validate him. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody claimed anything was missing. No one pointed at Malik. The supervisor arrived a minute later, stepping into frame with that "what's going on" posture. Already too late. Naomi gave a short, controlled summary. A detention of a minor, no victim, no property, biased language, physical restraint, cuffs displayed. The supervisor didn't argue on camera. He didn't want to. Not with phones rolling and a federal judge standing there holding her child. The officer tried one more time to minimize it, but his own footage boxed him in. Naomi requested the incident number. She requested the officer's information. She requested confirmation that the body cam would be preserved. She made it clear she'd be filing formal complaints with the mall, the security contractor, and the appropriate oversight channels. Then, she walked Malik away. Not rushed, not dramatic, just done. And right there, you could tell the officer knew something else, too. This wasn't staying in the mall. By the time Naomi and Malik reached the escalator, 3 different phones had already uploaded clips, not later that night. Right then. The kind of quick post that spreads because it's short, clear, and ugly in the simplest way. An adult restraining a 10-year-old with cuffs out, while using "your type, you people" language on camera. Within hours, the video hit local community pages. Then bigger accounts picked it up. People didn't need a long explanation. The footage explained itself. The mall tried to get ahead of it with a bland statement about safety and taking all concerns seriously. That didn't land. The problem wasn't that the officer asked a question. The problem was everything he did after he couldn't support the accusation. The security contractor reacted next. First move was damage control. They said they'd review the incident. They used careful wording. Meanwhile, the clip kept moving. What made this blow up wasn't Naomi's title, even though that's what the headlines latched onto. It was how clean the evidence was. No victim appeared. Nothing was recovered. The officer started from a vague suspicion and never built anything real. He escalated anyway. He grabbed a child. He brought cuffs into the moment. He used biased language more than once. And all of it was recorded. Naomi didn't go looking for attention. She handled it the way someone does when they know oversight exists and expects it to function. She filed formal complaints with mall management and the security company, and she pushed to preserve everything: the full body cam file, nearby mall cameras, security office footage, the entire timeline. She didn't rely on the viral clip alone. She locked down the record. The company placed Officer Halverson on leave quickly, because keeping him on shift would have been reckless. After that, the internal review turned into a detailed, time-stamped breakdown. They tracked what he claimed to see, what he actually verified, what he said, when he made physical contact, and what he used to justify pulling cuffs on a 10-year-old without a complainant in sight. Then they pulled his history. That's when it stopped being a single bad stop. Similar complaints showed up with the same shape: aggressive approaches, vague suspicion, people reporting biased tone, parents describing how quickly he escalated. Some of those complaints had been brushed off before because there wasn't enough proof. This time there was. The company considered the usual exit ramps, the kind of soft response that makes things go away quietly. That idea didn't survive once lawyers and liability entered the room. A child being restrained without grounds, with biased language on camera, isn't something you patch with a training reminder. So the outcome moved straight. He stayed on leave through the review, and then he was terminated. Not a quiet reassignment, not a mutual agreement. Fired because the footage made it impossible to defend his choices. After that, the mall announced changes because the public pressure didn't fade. They tightened detention standards, so an officer couldn't grab someone based on a feeling. They set clearer rules around minors. They made supervisors mandatory in certain situations. They pushed de-escalation harder. They also emphasized body cam compliance, because everybody had just watched what happens when cameras are on and someone still chooses to act reckless. For Naomi and Malik, the aftermath looked different. Malik had to process that an adult treated him like a suspect for standing near bags. Naomi kept his world steady while she handled the official side. She didn't turn her kid into a spectacle. She focused on making sure the record led to consequences, not excuses. That's the real lesson people took from it. Suspicion isn't proof. Proximity isn't guilt. And when someone in authority decides to gamble on prejudice, video is what forces the truth to stay in place long enough for accountability to catch up. What would you have done in Naomi's position? Would you have started filming immediately? Would you have demanded a supervisor right away? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've seen something like this happen where you live, talk about it. And if you want more stories where documentation flips the power back where it belongs, like and subscribe.